Fiona's day was already a masterpiece of controlled chaos. Every morning felt like a race against the clock and the ghost of overdue bills. She juggled a temp job in the financial district, coding classes at night, and the persistent hum of anxiety about her ex-boyfriend, David, who seemed to haunt her credit score more effectively than he ever haunted her dreams. She was 27, perpetually tired, and always rushing. Today, rushing meant a near sprint through the packed coffee shop, a steaming latte clutched in her hand like a fragile lifeline. The air buzzed with the frantic energy of morning commuters, a symphony of tapping keyboards, hushed phone calls, and the aggressive hiss of the espresso machine. Fiona navigated the tight space, her eyes scanning for an open spot, her mind already on the spreadsheet she needed to tackle before lunch. One foot in front of the other, just get through this, she told herself, as she had every day for the past 2 years. Then, a wall. Not a literal wall, but a sudden, unyielding presence that blocked her path. She barely registered the expensive fabric, the scent of a sophisticated cologne, before she collided. Her hand flew up, the flimsy lid popped, and the entire contents of her latte cascaded over the impeccable front of the man in front of her. A gasp caught in her throat. Time seemed to stretch, agonizingly slow. The rich, creamy coffee bloomed across his chest, soaking into the dark, bespoke silk suit, a grotesque floral pattern of beige and brown. Her gaze, horrified, slid down to his tie, a deep, luxurious burgundy silk, now marred by a thick, dripping streak of her clumsy mistake. It clung to the fabric, a sticky, inescapable reminder of her absolute failure. He didn't flinch, not a muscle. He simply stood there, a towering, formidable figure, utterly still, as the hot liquid ran down his chest. His silence was more potent than any shout. Fiona's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure mortification. Every eye in the coffee shop felt like it was drilling into her. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole, to transport her back to her cramped apartment, to anywhere but this public spectacle of her ineptitude. He was older than her, probably mid-30s, with dark, sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His jaw was set, his expression unreadable, yet radiating an intensity that made her instinctively shrink back. He wasn't just a man, he was a force, a quiet, dangerous force. "Oh my God," Fiona choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "I am so sorry. I'm so incredibly clumsy. Let me get you a towel or some napkins, anything. I'll pay for the dry cleaning, I swear." She fumbled in her bag for her wallet, already calculating how many shifts it would take to cover what looked like a suit worth more than her monthly rent. The guilt was a heavy stone in her stomach. He finally moved, a slow, deliberate tilt of his head. His eyes, dark and piercing, locked onto hers. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, before he spoke. His voice was low, a deep rumble that somehow cut through the coffee shop's din, yet sounded like it was meant only for her. It wasn't angry, not exactly, but it held an absolute, unshakable authority that made the hairs on her arms stand up. "You'll work it off." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a declaration, cold and utterly final. His gaze dropped briefly to the ruined silk tie, then back to her, a promise and a threat woven into those 3 simple words. Fiona felt a chill, despite the lingering warmth of the spilled coffee. This wasn't just about dry cleaning. This was about something far more terrifying. Fiona's legs moved on their own, a dazed automaton following the imposing figure ahead. Her mind was a scrambled mess of panic and disbelief. "You'll work it off." The words echoed cold and absolute, overriding the clamor of the San Francisco street. She was still sticky with the phantom warmth of coffee, a constant reminder of her catastrophic clumsiness. The man, Theodore Griffin, hadn't even looked back, simply moved, with a quiet, terrifying confidence that demanded she fall in line. He led her away from the bustling coffee shop, through the polished canyons of the financial district. His building was less a building and more a statement. Sleek, dark glass, minimalist to the point of anonymity, it didn't scream power, it existed it. No grand logos, just a discreet, almost invisible plaque. Fiona felt a shiver, a primal instinct screaming that she was walking into something far beyond her depth. Inside, the air was hushed, thick with expensive silence. The lobby was vast, empty save for a single impeccably dressed receptionist who didn't even glance up as Theodore swept past. A silent nod, the only acknowledgement. Fiona felt like a smudge on a pristine canvas. She was still wearing her slightly rumpled temp clothes, her hair probably a mess. Every insecurity she owned flared to life, burning hot. They rode a private elevator, all polished steel and hushed ascent, to the top floor. Her ears popped. When the doors opened, it was into an office that looked like it had been carved from a single block of ice and chrome. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying view of the city, the bay, and the distant fog-shrouded piers. This wasn't an office. It was a command center. Theodore turned, finally. He hadn't changed his coffee-stained suit, and the dark silk tie still bore the stark beige streak. It was a bizarre, almost defiant detail. He gestured to a chair opposite his massive obsidian desk. "Sit." Fiona obeyed, her knees feeling weak. This wasn't an interview. There were no questions about her resume, her skills, her aspirations. This was an unveiling. "You're quick," he said, his voice still low but now with a sharp edge. "And you're observant. Your temp agency file says you're proficient in several database systems, and you're studying coding at night." His eyes, dark as polished obsidian, bored into hers. "I require an assistant. Someone who can handle complex data, maintain absolute discretion, and most importantly, someone I can trust." Fiona swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. Trust. He'd known her for 10 minutes, most of which she'd spent drowning him in coffee. This was insane, dangerous. Every alarm bell in her head was screaming. He was a man who moved through the city like a shadow, commanding an empire she couldn't even begin to fathom. What kind of trust did a man like this need? I don't understand," she managed, her voice thin. "I'm a temp. I spilled coffee on you. I can pay for the dry cleaning, really. I have excellent references for administrative work, but I'm not qualified for whatever this is." He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the desk. The movement was small, but it amplified his presence tenfold. "You're qualified enough. You're intelligent, and you're in debt. I know. Your credit report is surprisingly easy to access." Her breath hitched. He knew about David. He knew about her crippling student loans, the medical bills, the endless financial treadmill she was on. The implicit promise of stability, of money, hit her with the force of a physical blow. It was a siren song, tempting and terrifying. It was everything she needed, offered by the very man who unsettled her to her core. "My business is logistics," Theodore continued, ignoring her stunned silence. "Complex, high-volume operations. I need someone to manage my personal schedule, yes, but also to organize and audit specific financial records, confidential ones. You will be compensated generously. You will be discreet. You will be efficient. You will not ask questions about things that do not concern you." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "And you will be loyal. My rules are simple. Break them and you will regret it. But I don't make threats I don't intend to keep, and I don't tolerate incompetence from my people." His code was clear. He was ruthless but not arbitrary. He was a man of rules, however dark or self-serving they might be. He wasn't threatening her physically, not directly. He was threatening her future, her precarious stability. And he was offering her a way out of the suffocating debt that had defined her adult life. Fiona felt a strange, cold clarity settle over her. This was a devil's bargain, but what choice did she truly have? Her old life was barely clinging on. This was a lifeline, albeit one tethered to a shark. He pushed a stack of files across the desk. They looked innocuous enough: shipping manifests, invoices, quarterly reports. But there were hundreds of them, a mountain of paper. Your first task: organize these, find the discrepancies. Show me what you can do. As she reached for the files, her fingers brushing against the crisp paper, a flicker of something she hadn't expected ignited within her, a spark of challenge. This wasn't just mindless temp work, this was a puzzle, a dangerous, potentially life-altering puzzle. Theodore watched her, a hint of something unreadable in his eyes, as if assessing not just her intelligence, but her very soul. She knew with chilling certainty that her life had just irrevocably changed. Fiona slid into her new routine with the grim efficiency of a soldier adapting to a foreign land. Theodore Griffin's office was indeed a gilded cage. Every surface gleamed, every sound was muted, every interaction precise. It was a world away from the chipped mugs and fluorescent hum of her previous temp gigs. Here the coffee was artisanal, delivered silently to her desk, and the silence was deep, expensive, broken only by the soft click of her keyboard or the occasional low murmur of Theodore's voice from his private office. She observed. She couldn't help it. The way the other staff, lean and impeccably dressed, moved with a quiet deference around Theodore. The hushed tones when his name was spoken. The way phone calls abruptly ended or shifted when he entered a room. There was respect, yes, but beneath it a palpable thread of fear. It wasn't the fear of a bully, it was the fear of absolute, unyielding power. He didn't need to shout to be obeyed. A glance, a slight shift in his posture, was enough. Slowly, she began to piece together the vastness of his logistics empire. It wasn't just shipping manifests and invoices. It was a complex web stretching across the entire city, controlling everything from port authorities to the intricate supply chains that fed the financial district's gleaming towers. Cranes on the Embarcadero, she realized, were part of his domain. The trucks moving through the city at all hours. He didn't just move goods, he was the movement, a silent, omnipresent force. The deeper she delved, the more she understood the weight of his declaration. You'll work it off. There was no escaping this man. Theodore, true to his word, started her with basic invoices, mountains of them, but even these mundane documents were a test. Fiona, armed with her night school coding knowledge and a natural aptitude for patterns, found herself surprisingly good at it. She'd always seen numbers as puzzles, and now, with the stakes so high, her focus was razor-sharp. She created mini-scripts to cross-reference data points, developed her own internal system, and started flagging minor discrepancies with an almost obsessive zeal. He noticed. He didn't say much, but she could feel his eyes on her when she presented her findings. He'd nod, a slow, deliberate movement, or ask a single, piercing question that cut straight to the core of an issue. And she pointed out a recurring anomaly in a series of freight charges, a small, almost undetectable rounding error that, over thousands of invoices, added up to a significant sum. He simply took the report, his expression unreadable. But the next batch of invoices he gave her was slightly more complex, the numbers denser. He was testing her, pushing her, and a strange, almost exhilarating thrill sparked within her. He respected her intelligence. That much was clear. Then came the subtle shifts, the hints that this was more than just a glorified accounting job. "I need someone with an eye for detail," he'd say, leaning against her desk, his presence filling her small space. "Someone who sees what others miss. Especially when it comes to sensitive documents. Trust is paramount." The phrase "sensitive documents" hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. He didn't elaborate, but the implication was clear. These weren't just about miscalculations anymore. Fiona felt the tension coil tighter in her stomach. This job, This gilded cage offered a stability she'd only ever dreamed of. The pay was obscenely generous, her debts were finally shrinking, and David's shadow felt a little less suffocating. But with every passing day, with every veiled hint of the true nature of Theodore's business, she felt a sliver of her moral clarity fray. She was safe, yes, but at what cost? The freedom she was slowly losing felt like a phantom limb, an ache for something she might never reclaim. She was trapped, caught between the terrifying lure of security and the nagging fear of complicity. Fiona became a machine, fueled by strong coffee and the relentless thrum of anxiety. She dove into the invoices, a sea of numbers and dates, each page a puzzle waiting to be solved. Her coding classes, once a side hustle, now felt like a secret weapon. She built mini-programs in her head, cross-referencing vendor IDs, shipping dates, and weight manifests. The office was silent, but in her mind she was a whirlwind of data, tracing lines, connecting dots. At first, the discrepancies were small. A misplaced decimal here, a slightly inflated fuel surcharge there. She'd flag them, meticulously noting her findings, feeling a strange satisfaction each time she unearthed an error. It was like peeling back layers, revealing the bone beneath the skin. Theodore would take her reports, his dark eyes scanning her notes, his expression unreadable. He never praised, never smiled, but the next batch of invoices would always be a little more complex, a little more challenging. It was his way of acknowledging her. His silent, intense approval was a strange kind of intimacy. Then she found it. A pattern of recurring charges from a specific freight company, always slightly above market rate, always for routes that seemed unnecessarily circuitous. Individually, they were negligible. Cumulatively, they represented a significant bleed. She worked late, cross-referencing historical data, checking port logs against the billing. The numbers didn't lie. Someone was skimming. Someone was exploiting the system, and Theodore Griffin's system at that. She presented her findings to him the next morning, her heart thumping. He sat back in his chair, a silent monolith, as she laid out her evidence, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She explained the algorithm she'd mentally constructed, the logical leaps, the cold, hard data. "You're certain?" he asked, his voice low, a challenge more than a question. "The numbers are consistent, Mr. Griffin," she said, meeting his gaze. "The variances are too precise to be accidental. It's deliberate. And it's been happening for at least 6 months." He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. She saw a flicker there, something that wasn't anger, but a deep, calculating focus. It was the look of a man who appreciated precision, even when it pointed to betrayal. "Show me." She walked him through the data on her screen, pointing out the anomalies, the hidden trails. His proximity was a palpable force, a quiet hum of power that made her skin tingle. He didn't question her methods, only her conclusions. He pushed, he probed, testing her logic, her conviction. She held her ground, every answer sharp, concise, backed by proof. When she finished, he simply nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "Good work, Fiona." The words, rare and unadorned, landed with surprising weight. A warmth spread through her, a rush of validation she hadn't realized she craved. He saw her, truly saw her, not just as a temp, but as a mind. And in that shared moment of competence, a fragile, unspoken connection formed. It was dangerous, exhilarating. The attraction was a silent undercurrent, a faint hum beneath the surface of their professional interactions. She found herself noticing the sharp line of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead when he leaned over a document, the unexpected grace of his large hands. He was a force of nature, controlled and formidable, and she, a small, insignificant cog, was somehow holding his attention. His respect for her intellect was a potent thing, making him less monster, more enigma. He didn't tolerate incompetence, but he also didn't tolerate overt cruelty from his staff. She'd seen him silence a boisterous manager with a single look when the man was needlessly harsh on a junior employee. It was a strange, dark fairness. One afternoon, she was at the main office printer, retrieving a massive report. Marcus, a mid-level manager with a slick smile and an overly familiar manner, sidled up beside her. "Still drowning in Griffin's paperwork, Fiona? Or are you finding other ways to keep him happy?" His voice was a low, suggestive purr, and he leaned too close, his cologne cloying. Fiona felt a cold prickle of discomfort. She straightened, clutching the stack of papers, ready with a sharp retort. Before she could speak, a shadow fell over them. Theodore Griffin. He hadn't made a sound, simply appeared. His presence was an immediate chilling blanket over the space. Marcus stiffened, his slick smile dissolving instantly. Theodore didn't look at Fiona. His gaze was fixed on Marcus, cold and unwavering. "Marcus, your quarterly projections are due on my desk in an hour. I expect them to be flawless, and I expect you to be at your desk, focused on your work." His voice was quiet, but it was like a sudden drop in temperature. Marcus stammered, his face paling. "Yes, Mr. Griffin, right away, Mr. Griffin." He practically fled, leaving a faint trail of cheap cologne. Theodore turned to Fiona. His eyes held hers for a beat, a silent, unreadable exchange. He picked up a stray sheet of paper that had fallen from her pile, placed it carefully back on top. His fingers brushed hers. A fleeting spark. "Focus on your work, Fiona," he murmured, his voice softer now, but still carrying that undercurrent of absolute authority. Then he walked away, leaving her standing there, heart hammering, a complex mix of gratitude and profound unease swirling within her. He had protected her, yes, but the power he wielded, the casual way he used it, was terrifying. The discrepancies weren't just small errors anymore. Fiona stared at the screen, her heart a cold knot in her chest. What started as subtle rounding errors had spiraled into a sophisticated network of false manifests, phantom shipments, and inflated tariffs. This wasn't just skimming. This was a full-blown operation, bleeding hundreds of thousands from Theodore's legitimate port logistics. Smuggling, it had to be, or a massive, organized theft. The central conflict, the vague unease that had been simmering beneath her surface, now solidified into a terrifying, undeniable truth. She was auditing a criminal enterprise. She took a deep, shaky breath, pushing away from her desk. Her office, once a haven of quiet productivity, now felt like a glass cage. Every number she'd meticulously tracked, every pattern she'd identified, pointed to a deliberate, calculated scheme. And she, Fiona Edwards, the temp who just wanted to pay off her debts, was now knee-deep in it. Theodore was in his office, the door ajar, a low murmur of voices occasionally escaping. She knew she had to confront him. Had to. Her moral compass, battered but not broken, demanded it. The thought sent a jolt of pure dread through her. What would a man like Theodore Griffin do when faced with undeniable proof of betrayal within his ranks? And what would he do to her for bringing it to him? Clutching the printed reports, her hands slightly damp, she walked to his door. He was alone, staring out at the city skyline, his back to her. The silence of his office was heavy, charged. "Mr. Griffin?" Her voice was barely a whisper. He turned slowly. His expression was, as always, unreadable, but his dark eyes seemed to pierce straight through her. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. Fiona laid the reports on his gleaming obsidian surface. "I found something," she began, her voice gaining strength, fueled by a desperate need for clarity. "It's not just discrepancies anymore. It's systemic. A pattern of fraudulent invoicing tied to several port logistics companies. False declarations, inflated weights, non-existent cargo. It's a very large operation, Mr. Griffin." She met his gaze, refusing to look away. "This is beyond my scope. I'm an assistant. I can't be complicit in this. Whatever this is, it feels illegal. I need to know what I'm getting into." The words tumbled out, a raw confession of her fear and her ethical line in the sand. Theodore didn't flinch. He picked up one of the reports, his fingers brushing the highlighted figures. He scanned them, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "You're right," he said, his voice low, steady. "It's illegal, and it's deliberate." He looked up, his eyes holding hers. "I brought you in for precisely this, Fiona. I knew there was a leak. Someone within my legitimate operations is either working with or being exploited by people outside my network. They are skimming from my profits, yes, but more importantly, they're undermining the integrity of my business. And they're doing it by exploiting the port workers, manipulating their shifts and manifests." His voice dropped, taking on a dangerous edge she hadn't heard before. "I built this empire on reliability, on a certain understanding. I don't tolerate those who steal from their own or who prey on the vulnerable. These people, whoever they are doing both." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "I need someone I can trust, someone intelligent enough to untangle this web, to find the true perpetrators without alerting them. Someone like you." Fiona felt a chill run down her spine, a strange mix of terror and a reluctant respect. He was admitting to a dark world, but his code of honor, however warped, was surprisingly clear. He despised betrayal, especially betrayal that hurt his workers. He needed her to be his scalpel, dissecting the rot from within. "This is my proposal, Fiona," he continued, leaning forward. "You will continue your work. You will identify every single false entry, every connection, every single person involved. You will build a bulletproof case for me to clean my house. You will be compensated beyond anything you've imagined. But you will be discreet. You will be loyal, and you will see this through." He pushed a sleek black USB drive across the desk. It looked ordinary, innocuous. "This is encrypted. Every piece of data you uncover, every detail will go onto this drive. It will be secure, untraceable, and it will be your key to dismantling this." Fiona stared at the drive, then back at him. The stakes were terrifyingly clear. She was being asked to step into the heart of a dangerous game, to become an accomplice, yes, but also an instrument of a strange, dark justice. She was trapped, but as she looked at the mountain of fraudulent data, at the intellectual challenge it represented, a different kind of compulsion stirred within her. The thrill of the puzzle, the unexpected trust he was placing in her, the sheer audacity of it all. It was a dangerous proposal, but it was also a chance to finally, truly make a difference, to escape her old life entirely. She reached for the USB drive, her fingers trembling slightly. Her life, she knew, would never be the same. Fiona had never worked with such intense focus. The encrypted USB drive was a vault of secrets, and she was its locksmith. Day after day, she burrowed deeper into the labyrinthine data, her laptop humming, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She cross-referenced manifests, analyzed shipping routes, and built complex algorithms to track the phantom cargo Theodore had tasked her with finding. Her coding skills, once just a path to a better temp job, were now a weapon in a war she barely understood. Each false entry she identified, each inflated tariff, felt like a small victory against the looming shadow of Theodore's world. She was deep into a particularly convoluted series of port invoices, tracing a pattern of seemingly random small-scale discrepancies that kept slipping past her initial sweeps. They weren't large enough to trigger immediate alerts, but they were consistent, like tiny gnats buzzing around a larger feast. She zoomed in, reran a custom script, and then she saw it. A specific, almost elegant way of fudging the numbers, a unique method for obscuring a transaction's true value by subtly miscategorizing freight types. It was a signature. A cold dread began to seep into her bones, slow and insidious. Her breath hitched. She stared at the screen, her mind refusing to connect the dots, even as her gut screamed the truth. The error wasn't just an error, it was a style, a precise, almost artistic touch of deception. Suddenly her office felt too small, the air too thin. Her vision blurred, not from fatigue, but from a sudden, visceral memory. David, with his charming smile and easy lies. David, who'd convinced her to co-sign loans she couldn't afford, promising a future that evaporated like smoke. "It's just a little creative accounting fee," he'd purred, showing her how to shift funds, how to make expenses disappear on paper, always with that crooked, irresistible grin. He'd taught her that specific trick, that subtle reclassification, back when she'd naively believed his schemes were harmless, just ways to optimize their shared finances. He'd used it to hide his gambling debts, to funnel money away from their joint account, leaving her with the wreckage. The memories hit her like a physical blow. The way he'd always made her feel stupid for questioning him. The way he'd twisted her guilt into complicity. The endless calls from creditors, the crushing weight of his abandoned debts, all dumped squarely on her shoulders. That was David's signature. That specific, almost arrogant flourish of dishonesty. No, it couldn't be. Her ex-boyfriend, the man who'd left her financially ruined and emotionally scarred, couldn't possibly be connected to Theodore Griffin, the logistics kingpin who ran half the city. The idea was too monstrous, too coincidental. But the evidence on the screen was undeniable. The ghost in the ledger was real. It wasn't just David's method, it was his. The exact, idiosyncratic flaw she'd learned to recognize during her own painful education in his deceit. Shock turned to a sickening lurch of guilt. She had brought this here. She was the connection. David, her manipulative ex, was orchestrating the fraud, perhaps even trying to frame Theodore. Her past, the one she desperately tried to outrun, had just collided with her terrifying present. A wave of profound fear washed over her, chilling her to the bone. Fear of David, fear of Theodore's wrath, fear of what this meant for her already precarious position. Her hand instinctively went to her pocket, her fingers closing around the smooth, cool surface of her jade worry stone. She hadn't realized she was even carrying it, a relic from the darkest days of her life with David. She rubbed it with her thumb, a frantic, unconscious motion, a desperate attempt to ground herself as her internal world crumbled around her. Her ex wasn't just a ghost in her credit report. He was a living, breathing threat, and he was tangled up in Theodore Griffin's empire. And now, so was she. Fiona's world had shrunk to the glowing screen of her laptop and the chilling secret she held inside. The jade worry stone was a constant cool weight in her pocket, her thumb tracing its smooth surface even when her hands were still. Her meticulously organized desk, once a testament to her efficiency, now felt like a fragile barrier against the chaos in her mind. Her focus, usually a laser beam, fractured into 1,000 anxious pieces. She found herself staring at the same line of figures for minutes, the numbers blurring, David's smug face superimposed over them. Her once precise movements were now jerky, her fingers fumbling over the keyboard. She'd catch herself glancing furtively towards Theodore's closed office door, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. Every hushed conversation in the hallway, every unexpected knock sent a jolt of pure panic through her. She was a coiled spring, wound too tight, ready to snap. Theodore noticed he didn't miss anything. Fiona felt his gaze, a phantom touch on her skin, even when he was sequestered in his office. He'd walk past her desk, his steps silent, and she'd sense the subtle shift in the air, the momentary pause in his stride. Sometimes she'd look up to find his dark eyes already on her, unblinking, assessing. She'd quickly duck her head, pretending to be engrossed in a report, But the heat of her blush was a betrayal. He was a predator, and she, a cornered animal, was flailing. One afternoon, the silence in the office felt particularly heavy, suffocating. Fiona was supposed to be cross-referencing a large shipment manifest, but her eyes kept drifting to an email from her temp agency, a mundane reminder about timesheets. It felt impossibly distant, a relic from a life she no longer inhabited. She squeezed the worrystone hard. Theodore's door opened. He didn't call her name. He simply stood there, framed in the doorway, his silhouette stark against the panoramic city view behind him. His presence filled the entire space, drawing every molecule of air towards him. Fiona's heart hammered against her ribs. "Fiona," he said, his voice low, devoid of inflection, yet carrying a dangerous undertone she'd come to recognize. "My office, now." She stood, her legs feeling like jelly, and followed him. The walk felt like an execution march. She sat in the familiar leather chair, rigid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the worrystone digging into her palm. He didn't sit immediately. He walked to the window, his back to her, then turned slowly, his gaze sweeping over her, dissecting her. "Your work has become erratic," he stated, not a question, but an observation, cold and precise. "Your usual meticulousness has been replaced by distraction. Your reports are missing minor details you would normally flag." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, heavy with accusation. "Is there something you wish to tell me?" The question was simple, direct, but it felt like a trap. 1,000 responses flashed through her mind. "Yes, your accountant is my ex-boyfriend, and he ruined my life. And now he's stealing from you, and I recognized his specific brand of evil in your books." The thought was paralyzing. Fear of Theodore's wrath was a cold fist in her gut. What would he do? The man wielded immense, terrifying power. Would he see her as an accomplice? Would he think she was in on it with David, trying to protect him? The idea of being implicated, of having her fragile new life crumble, was unbearable. She couldn't risk it. Not yet. Not when she still hoped, with a desperate, childish part of her, that she was wrong, that it wasn't David. "No, Mr. Griffin," she lied, her voice barely a whisper, a traitorous tremor running through it. She hated herself for it. I've just been a little overwhelmed. The volume of the data is quite significant. I apologize. I'll refocus." His eyes, dark and unblinking, held hers. She saw no anger, no immediate accusation, only that unnerving, absolute scrutiny. He didn't believe her. She knew it. Every fiber of her being screamed it. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, pushing down on her. The trust, that fragile, dangerous thing that had been slowly building between them, was now shattering. He took a slow step towards his desk, picked up a single, highlighted invoice from her last report. "This particular discrepancy," he said, his voice softer now, but infinitely more dangerous. "You missed it. Yet, it fits the pattern you yourself identified. A pattern of unique accounting." He laid the invoice back down. "I don't tolerate distractions, Fiona. Not from my people. Not when the stakes are this high." She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. He knew, or at least he suspected, he was giving her a chance, a final opening. But the fear was too overwhelming, the implications too vast. She couldn't bring herself to confess. Not when she could lose everything. She recognized the danger. Withholding information from Theodore Griffin was like playing with fire, a potentially fatal mistake. But the fear of his unpredictable power, the knowledge of what a man like him could do, kept her silent. Her secret was a ticking time bomb, and she was trapped, watching the seconds disappear. Theodore's unspoken challenge, his cold, knowing gaze, had shaken Fiona to her core. Her lie, thin and fragile, felt like a betrayal. She couldn't live with it. Not when the truth felt like a burning coal in her stomach. His warning about distractions had echoed in her head all night. She had to know, definitively, either confirm her worst fears or finally, mercifully, put them to rest. The next morning, armed with a desperate resolve, Fiona plunged back into the digital abyss. She wasn't just looking for discrepancies now, she was hunting. She pushed past the complex coding she'd written, past the algorithms she'd built, and started digging into the metadata, the digital fingerprints left behind. She searched for anomalies, not in the numbers, but in the creation of the documents. Her night school classes hadn't just taught her to code, they'd taught her to think like a system, and systems left traces. She started cross-referencing IP addresses associated with specific invoice uploads, matching them against known public networks. She looked for timestamps that defied logic, for file properties that suggested remote access or unusual software. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, fueled by a frantic, almost manic energy. The jade worrystone was clutched so tightly in her left hand, its edges almost biting into her palm. Then she found it. Not a single glaring error, but a constellation of tiny, almost invisible ones. A specific version of accounting software used for a small subset of the fraudulent invoices. A recurring, unique identifier in the metadata of certain digital signatures, a pattern of login times that correlated not with port operations, but with a specific time zone, one David had lived in briefly after they broke up. Each piece, innocuous on its own, clicked into place with horrifying precision. Her breath hitched. She pulled up a public record search, cross-referencing a known contact David had listed on an old loan application with a subsidiary company listed on one of the forged manifests. The connection was undeniable. The name, the address, the dates. It was David. The screen flared with the evidence, a horrifying tapestry of deceit. It wasn't just a few false entries, it was a meticulously constructed web. David wasn't merely an accomplice, he was the architect. He was siphoning massive amounts of money, not just from Theodore's profits, but from the legitimate shipping operations that sustained countless port workers. He wasn't just skimming, he was actively trying to destabilize a significant portion of Theodore's empire, likely intending to either take it over or frame Theodore for the very crimes he was committing. The sheer audacity of it, the scale of his betrayal, made her stomach churn. He wasn't just a ghost from her past. He was a monster, far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. The door to her office clicked open. Fiona didn't even flinch. She was too numb, too engrossed in the cold, hard proof staring back at her. She heard the soft, familiar tread of Theodore's expensive shoes on the carpet, felt the subtle shift in the air, the sudden, weighty presence. He didn't say anything. He simply walked to her side, his gaze falling, uninvited, onto her screen. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat. She wanted to shrink, to disappear, to cover the screen. But she couldn't. She simply sat there, frozen, the jade stone a cold lump in her hand. His eyes, dark as midnight, scanned the incriminating document, the highlighted connections, the cross-referenced names, the digital signature that screamed David's name. He saw it all. He saw him, and he saw her, sitting there, staring at the proof, her face pale, her guilt an open wound. His gaze lifted from the screen, slowly, deliberately, to meet hers. There was no anger, no shock, no triumph. Only a deep, unsettling stillness. A silent, knowing look passed between them, thick with unspoken understanding. Her secret, the one she had tried so desperately to bury, was out. The true antagonist was no longer a phantom in the numbers, but a very real, very dangerous man. And Theodore Griffin knew everything. The air in the office was thick, suffocating. Fiona couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Theodore stood beside her, silent, unblinking, his gaze fixed on the screen, on the undeniable proof of David's betrayal. The digital signature, the cross-referenced addresses, the unique accounting method, it all screamed her ex-boyfriend's name. Her carefully guarded secret, her deepest shame, was laid bare. She waited for the explosion, for the cold fury she knew a man like Theodore Griffin was capable of. Instead, there was only that profound, unsettling stillness. He finally looked at her, his dark eyes like deep, unreadable pools. "Say it," he commanded, his voice a low rumble, devoid of judgment, yet heavy with expectation. Fiona swallowed, her throat dry. The words scraped against it. "It's David, my ex-boyfriend. He ruined me financially. He left me with crippling debt. This method of deception. It's his. I recognized it. He's the one behind the fraudulent invoices." Her voice cracked on the last word, a raw confession. Guilt, hot and sharp, pierced her. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Griffin. I should have told you sooner. I was scared. Scared of what you'd do. Scared of being implicated. Scared of him." She poured out the rest, the torrent of shame and fear finally unleashed. His manipulative charm, the way he'd bled her dry, the constant shadow of his presence in her life. She told him about the debts, the struggle, the desperation that had made her take this job, a job that had now led her straight back to the monster she'd tried so hard to escape. "I brought him into your world," she finished, her voice a desperate whisper. "I'm the reason he's here." Theodore listened, his expression unyielding, his gaze unwavering. Not once did he interrupt. Not once did his face betray anger directed at her. When she finally fell silent, trembling, he moved. He walked around her desk, his shadow falling over her, and leaned against the edge, closer than he'd ever been. "You didn't bring him into my world, Fiona," he stated, his voice still low, but now with an icy edge that sent a shiver down her spine. "He was already trying to claw his way in. You merely uncovered him, and you did it with a level of insight and integrity that none of my trusted people managed." His eyes, dark and intense, held hers. "You were scared, yes, but you came to me. You are here. That takes courage." The unexpected words were a balm, a lifeline in the swirling chaos of her guilt. He wasn't angry at her. His anger, she realized, was a cold, deep current, directed squarely at David, at the audacity of his betrayal, at the rot he'd tried to introduce into Theodore's system. It was the anger of a king, betrayed by a low-level thief, but also the fury of a man whose carefully constructed order had been violated. In that moment, a profound shift occurred. The terrifying, enigmatic boss became something more. He saw her, not just her competence, but her vulnerability, her history, and still found her worthy. He hadn't dismissed her, hadn't threatened her. He had acknowledged her bravery. Competence, she understood, was indeed a form of intimacy with Theodore Griffin, a dangerous, powerful connection, forged not in softness, but in shared purpose and brutal honesty. "We need to be meticulous," he continued, his voice now purely business, but with a new layer of shared purpose. "He cannot know we're onto him. You will continue to act as if you are simply auditing, building your ledger. But now it will be the clean ledger. Every legitimate transaction separated from every single one of his lies. You will build the undeniable proof." He straightened, a commanding presence. "I will use my network. He will be monitored. Every move, every contact. We will let him think he's succeeding while you build the cage around him." He looked at the USB drive on her desk, then back at her. "This drive, it is now our weapon. Keep it safe. Keep it secure. Your coding skills, Fiona, are about to be put to their ultimate test." Fiona nodded, a fierce determination replacing her fear. The dread hadn't entirely vanished, but it was now overshadowed by a powerful, almost exhilarating sense of purpose. She wasn't just a temp anymore. She wasn't just a victim. She was Theodore Griffin's unholy alliance, and together they would bring David down. Her life had irrevocably changed, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt like she might actually win. Fiona became a woman possessed. The USB drive, a tiny black rectangle, felt like a miniature fortress in her hand, the repository of truth she was painstakingly building. David's betrayal, once a paralyzing fear, now fueled a cold, relentless determination. She worked like a dervish, her fingers flying across the keyboard, the hum of her laptop a constant companion through long days and even longer nights. Her coding skills, honed in dimly lit night classrooms, were now deployed with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. She wasn't just identifying false entries anymore. She was meticulously reconstructing the authentic ledger. Every legitimate shipment, every honest tariff, every real port worker's wage was accounted for, separated from David's parasitic lies. She built new databases, wrote custom scripts to verify timestamps and GPS logs, cross-referenced satellite imagery with manifest declarations. The digital fortress grew, byte by byte, a monument to truth in a world of deception. Theodore, true to his word, provided everything she needed. Encrypted communication channels, secure servers buried deep within his network, access codes that felt like keys to a hidden kingdom. He trusted her implicitly, a terrifying and exhilarating leap of faith that solidified their strange, unholy alliance. Their partnership wasn't just about catching a thief, it was a high-stakes digital dance, each move calculated, each step vital. Late nights became their norm. The city lights twinkled beyond the panoramic windows of Theodore's office, a distant, glittering distraction. Fiona would present her findings, walking him through complex data points, explaining the logic of her new algorithms. He would listen, a silent, formidable presence, his dark eyes absorbing every detail. Sometimes he'd lean over her shoulder, his scent, sophisticated cologne, and something uniquely him, sharp and clean, enveloping her. His warmth, his proximity, was a constant, unsettling current, a silent acknowledgement of their shared purpose. He'd challenge her, not with doubt, but with probing questions that pushed her to refine her arguments, to make her proof irrefutable. "What if he argues X?" he'd ask, his voice low, his breath a warm whisper against her hair. She'd counter, her mind racing, a fierce satisfaction blooming when he'd give that slow, almost imperceptible nod of approval. It was competence as intimacy, a dangerous connection forged in the crucible of their shared mission. But even as the clean ledger grew, Fiona grappled with the ethical weight of it all. This wasn't just about numbers, it was about destroying a man's life. David, her ex, the monster who had left her in ruins. Could she really be the one to orchestrate his downfall? A cold knot of unease twisted in her stomach. She pictured him, his charming smile, his careless cruelty. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice. A dark, complicated justice, but justice nonetheless. She reminded herself of the port workers David was exploiting, the legitimate businesses he was bleeding dry, the integrity of the system Theodore, for all his shadows, sought to protect. She was protecting herself too, carving out a future free from David's toxic grasp, free from the crushing weight of debt. This wasn't just about Theodore, it was about her. The necessity of it, the chilling clarity of it pushed her forward. She was building a cage, yes, but it was a cage David had built for himself, brick by brick, lie by lie. The USB drive glowed faintly on her desk, a beacon of imminent reckoning. Fiona watched the progress bar crawl across her screen, a green sliver against the dark background. The clean ledger, weeks of relentless work, was almost fully copied to the secure server Theodore had set up. Just a few more seconds, and this monumental task would be complete. The weight of the USB drive in her hand felt impossibly heavy, a tiny vessel holding so much truth. She leaned back, a sigh of exhaustion and relief escaping her. Then the screen flickered. The green bar vanished. In its place, a stark red error message blared, "File corruption detected." Data integrity compromised. Upload terminated. Her blood ran cold. No. No. She stared, uncomprehending, then frantically clicked, tried to restart, tried to save. Nothing. The server, the one Theodore had promised was impregnable, was rejecting her. Her meticulously built data, her proof, was suddenly vulnerable. David. He was here. He was trying to destroy it. Panic, sharp and icy, clawed at her throat. She heard a soft click. Theodore was standing in her doorway, his silhouette imposing against the office lights. He hadn't made a sound. His eyes, dark and piercing, went from her pale, terrified face to the screaming red message on her screen. He didn't ask. He simply walked to her desk, his movements fluid, deliberate. He leaned over her shoulder, his proximity a sudden, overwhelming force. His fingers, long and strong, moved over her keyboard with an almost surgical precision. He typed a rapid series of commands, his focus absolute. Lines of code scrolled down the screen, too fast for her to follow. Then a new message flashed. External intrusion blocked, data restored from backup. Fiona gasped, a shaky breath escaping her. "What? What was that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He straightened, but stayed close. "An attempt to corrupt your upload," he said, his voice low and even, devoid of the alarm that still coursed through her. "A backdoor David tried to exploit. I detected it moments after you initiated the transfer. My system quarantined it. Your data is secure, but he's getting desperate." Relief washed over her, so potent it almost buckled her knees. But it was quickly followed by a fresh wave of terror. David was watching. He knew. How close had he come? How had Theodore known? The man was a ghost, anticipating moves before they were even made. Theodore turned, his dark eyes locking onto hers. He saw her fear, her profound distress. "He is not like me, Fiona," he stated, his voice taking on a different timbre, a quiet intensity. "I operate with a certain order, a code. My business, for all its shadow, provides. It feeds families, it builds infrastructure. I don't tolerate those who prey on the vulnerable, who betray trust, or who destabilize the legitimate aspects of my operations for pure, selfish greed." He stepped away, walking to the panoramic window, his gaze sweeping over the glittering city below. David's game is chaos. He doesn't build, he bleeds. He doesn't care about the workers whose shifts he manipulates, the small businesses whose invoices he inflates. He cares only for himself, for the quick, easy score. He will burn everything down if it means covering his tracks. Fiona watched him, a strange, chilling realization dawning. Theodore Griffin, the logistics kingpin, the man who ran half the city's underbelly, the monster she'd stumbled upon. Yet his words resonated with a twisted, undeniable truth. David, her charming, normal ex, had no code, no line he wouldn't cross. He was a parasite, willing to exploit anyone, even her, for his own gain. Theodore, for all his darkness, had principles, ruthless ones perhaps, but principles nonetheless. He wasn't a good man, not by conventional standards, but he was a man of his word, a man who, in his own brutal way, maintained an order. His ethical lines, however dark, were surprisingly clearer and stronger than David's utter lack of them. The monster, she realized, had a code, and in this shadowed world that made him, in a terrifying, undeniable way, more trustworthy than her normal ex. A calm, cold resolve settled over her. The fear was still there, a faint echo, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, unyielding purpose. She looked at the USB drive, then at Theodore's back. He wasn't a savior, but he was a protector, and he was offering her a chance to finally, truly be free. She would see this through, every last detail. "I understand," she said, her voice clear and steady, devoid of its earlier tremor. "I'm ready. What's next?" Theodore turned, a faint, almost imperceptible nod. His dark eyes held hers, a silent acknowledgement of her choice, of their solidified, dangerous trust. He didn't need to say anything. She knew they were in this together, and she would not falter. The last line of code shimmered on Fiona's screen, a perfectly balanced equation. She hit enter, and the final data point slotted into place. The clean ledger was complete. Every legitimate transaction, every true manifest, stood in stark contrast to David's web of lies, meticulously catalogued, cross-referenced, and verified. She transferred the entire encrypted file to the USB drive, watching the progress bar fill, a sense of grim satisfaction settling over her. This small black rectangle held the truth. It held David's downfall. She leaned back in her chair, a deep, weary breath escaping her. The weight that had pressed on her chest for weeks finally eased, replaced by a tense anticipation. The work was done. Now, the real danger began. Theodore entered her office without a sound, as usual. He surveyed her, his dark eyes taking in the glowing screen, the USB drive clutched in her hand. He didn't need to ask. He knew. "It's ready," she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her stomach. She held up the drive. He nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "Good. We move now." He walked to the edge of her desk, leaning against it, his presence commanding. David is a creature of opportunity and greed. He's been monitoring the usual channels for weaknesses, for a chance to capitalize further, or perhaps to destroy evidence he believes we might be close to finding. Fiona swallowed, her pulse quickening. "So, we give him one?" "Precisely," Theodore confirmed, a glint in his dark eyes. "There's a large shipment due at Pier 17, a significant cargo, seemingly routine but valuable. It's the kind of target he wouldn't be able to resist, especially if he thought there was a window to manipulate its manifests one last time or to plant something incriminating. We'll leak just enough." A whisper. A subtle misdirection in a minor internal memo. Enough to entice him, but not enough to alert him that he's walking into a trap. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't just about data anymore. This was about a physical confrontation, a direct engagement with the man who had haunted her for years. "At the docks?" she asked. The words barely a whisper. The image of the vast, fog-shrouded warehouses, the towering cranes, felt suddenly ominous. "Yes, a place where he feels he has an advantage, where he can disappear into the chaos," Theodore explained, his voice calm, detailing the plan with chilling precision. "We'll set the stage. He'll think it's his last chance for a big score, or his last chance to erase his fingerprints." Fiona's hand instinctively went to her pocket, her fingers closing around the smooth, cool surface of her jade worry stone. It had been her silent companion through weeks of digital warfare, and now it was a tangible link to the terrifying reality ahead. She rubbed it furiously with her thumb, a desperate prayer for strength. She imagined seeing David again, his slick smile, his arrogant confidence. Her stomach twisted. Fear warred with a fierce, cold resolve. She wouldn't let him win. Not this time. She looked at Theodore, his face a mask of controlled power. He was preparing for battle, and she was his unlikely weapon. The danger was palpable, thick in the air. But so was the sense of purpose, the unshakable belief that this had to be done. Days later, the subtle ripple effects of their leak began to reach them. Theodore's network confirmed David's heightened activity, his frantic inquiries into the Pier 17 shipment. He was circling, a shark, sensing blood in the water. He was falling for it. Fiona stared out her office window at the distant glimmer of the bay, the shadowy shapes of the port cranes barely visible through the evening haze. The stage was set. The trap was sprung. Her life, irrevocably changed, was about to collide with her past in a final explosive confrontation. She tightened her grip on the jade stone, bracing herself for the storm. The fog was a living thing, a thick, swirling blanket that swallowed the San Francisco skyline whole. Fiona peered through the passenger window of Theodore's sleek black car, her breath misting against the glass. The Embarcadero piers were a ghostly expanse, the giant cranes looming out of the grey like skeletal giants, their metal limbs barely visible, disappearing into the low-hanging clouds. The air was heavy, damp, and smelled of salt and diesel. A cold dread settled deep in her stomach, twisting tighter with every meter they moved deeper into the desolate landscape of the port. This was it. The final act. The car pulled up to a massive, ancient warehouse, its corrugated metal walls streaked with rust, its windows dark and grimy. It looked less like a place of commerce and more like a tomb. Theodore cut the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the distant, mournful wail of a foghorn. "Stay close." Theodore's voice was a low rumble beside her, cutting through the heavy atmosphere. He was a dark, formidable presence, his gaze sweeping the shadowy perimeter of the warehouse. He looked ready for anything. Fiona clutched the USB drive, a tiny, hard rectangle in her trembling hand. Her jade worrystone was already clutched tight in her other, the cool stone a small anchor in the rising tide of panic. They stepped out, the chill air biting at her exposed skin. The fog immediately enveloped them, muffling sounds, distorting shapes. Fiona felt disoriented, vulnerable. Every shadow seemed to shift, every distant clang echoing with ominous intent. Theodore walked with purpose, leading her towards a side entrance, a heavy steel door that groaned as he pushed it open. Inside, the warehouse was cavernous, vast and dimly lit by a few flickering overhead lights. Stacks of crates, impossibly tall, formed dark canyons, their labels unreadable in the gloom. The air was thick with the scent of dust, old wood, and something metallic. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat. Then she saw him, David. He was standing near a stack of what looked like empty shipping containers, illuminated by a single bare bulb. He was talking to two burly men, gesticulating wildly, a slick, anxious smile plastered on his face. He looked exactly as she remembered him, charming, arrogant, utterly self-absorbed. A gasp caught in her throat. Her legs felt suddenly weak, threatening to buckle. The man who had haunted her nightmares for years was suddenly, terrifyingly real, standing just meters away. David's head snapped up. His eyes, once so familiar, widened in surprise, then narrowed in a slow, dawning horror. His smile vanished. He saw Theodore. He saw her. His entire posture shifted from casual confidence to a rigid, cornered desperation. The jig was up. "Fiona, what are you doing here?" David's voice, once so smooth, was sharp, laced with a frantic edge. He took a step forward, then hesitated, his eyes flicking to Theodore. "Griffin, what is this? What's going on?" Theodore didn't respond. He simply stood, a silent, unyielding wall between Fiona and her past, his gaze fixed on David. His stillness was more menacing than any threat. David's eyes darted around, searching for an escape, for a way to twist the narrative. "Fiona, what have you told him? You know how this works, right? He's a dangerous man. You shouldn't be involved in his business. He's trying to frame me, don't you see? He's dragging you into his mess, just like he does everyone." He looked back at Theodore, his voice gaining a manipulative edge. "She's just a temp, Griffin. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's easily confused. She's always been so gullible, you know. That's why I always had to look out for her." He tried to meet Fiona's eyes, a desperate plea for complicity, for her usual guilt to kick in. But Fiona just stared at him, a cold, hard clarity settling over her. Gullible? He was trying to use her old wounds against her, to paint her as weak, to turn Theodore against her. The sheer audacity of his manipulation even now disgusted her. He still saw her as a pawn. "Don't listen to him, Mr. Griffin, Fiona said, her voice surprisingly steady though her hands were still trembling. He's lying. He's always lied. David's face contorted, his charm finally cracking under the pressure. Fiona, what are you saying? Have you lost your mind? He's a criminal. He'll use you and discard you. Theodore took a slow step forward, his gaze never leaving David. She knows precisely what she's saying. His voice was a low growl, a promise of retribution. Just as David opened his mouth to launch another desperate accusation, the warehouse plunged into absolute darkness. The flickering overhead lights died with a sudden, sickening pop. The dim glow vanished, replaced by an inky blackness that was total and disorienting. A collective gasp went up, followed by the shuffling of feet, the scrape of crates, and the low, guttural curses of David's men. Fiona cried out, a small, involuntary sound of pure terror. The world spun. The fog outside, once merely disorienting, now felt like a predatory force, pressing in from all sides. In the sudden, terrifying chaos, a new, primal fear took hold. They were trapped. The darkness was absolute, suffocating. Fiona cried out, a raw sound torn from her throat, swallowed instantly by the inky void. Panic clawed at her, a primal terror of being blind and trapped. Somewhere nearby, David was shouting, his voice shrill with fear and rage, mixing with the muffled curses of his men. The air crackled with chaos, but then a different kind of clarity cut through the fear. A flash of memory. The warehouse blueprints Theodore had shown her, detailing the emergency exits, the loading zones, the power distribution. She'd dismissed them as mundane details, but her coding-trained mind had absorbed every line, every symbol. The main breaker. It was on the far wall, near the employee entrance, a heavy industrial panel. Total darkness, total isolation. It was the only way. "Theodore!" she yelled, her voice surprisingly strong, cutting through the din. "The main breaker! I know where it is!" She didn't wait for a response. Adrenaline surged, burning away the last vestiges of her panic. She dropped to her hands and knees, crawling, her palms scraping against the grimy concrete floor, pushing past unseen obstacles. The sounds of struggle, of shouts and heavy footsteps, seemed to ebb and flow around her. She focused on the cold, damp air, the faint echo of her own breathing, and the mental map burned into her brain. Left turn past the third stack of containers. Follow the wall, keep low. Her fingers brushed against cold metal, then a heavy ridged panel. Relief, sharp and exhilarating, flooded her. She fumbled for the latch, her fingers clumsy in the dark, then found the heavy industrial lever. With a grunt of effort, she pulled it down. A guttural clang echoed through the cavernous space, and then a profound, almost sacred silence. Not a single emergency light flickered, not a distant glow from the outside fog, just absolute, impenetrable darkness. The world shrank to the pulse thrumming in her ears. She scrambled back, pulling her laptop from her bag, her fingers flying with practiced speed in the pitch black. She knew the layout of her keyboard by heart. She located the hidden access point Theodore had installed weeks ago, a small discrete port designed for secure, untraceable connections. Her USB drive, the clean ledger, was already clutched in her hand. With a click, the drive was in. With another, the cable connected her laptop to the Port Authority's secure network. Her screen, a small, pale beacon in the consuming darkness, flickered to life. Her fingers danced across the keys, a blur of motion. She typed, rapid fire, navigating the complex interface, initiating the upload. The green progress bar, small but fiercely defiant, began to crawl across the screen. Her heart hammered, a frantic drum against her ribs. This was it, the final irreversible step. She could hear Theodore's heavy breathing nearby, the subtle shift of his weight. David was still somewhere in the darkness, his frantic shouts now muffled, distant. The upload completed. A small, silent confirmation popped up on her screen. Transfer complete. Data integrity verified. Fiona disconnected, pulled the USB drive and closed her laptop, plunging them back into total darkness. She pushed herself up, her legs unsteady, but her resolve unshakable. She turned towards where she knew Theodore was standing, a formidable shadow in the gloom. "I've uploaded everything," she said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the suffocating black. The words, once so terrifying to contemplate, now felt like a declaration of war. The clean ledger, every single detail. It's gone straight to the Port Authority. Anonymous, but traceable back to his system, not yours. She took a step closer, the cold air between them charged with unspoken power. "Now you agree to my terms, Theodore." Her voice cracked with the sheer audacity of it, but she pushed through. "No retaliation. David goes through the system, the legal system, and so do you. For anything that comes out of that ledger, any of your less-than-legal operations, you accept the consequences. No private justice, no revenge. You go through the system too. Do you understand?" The silence that followed was immense, heavy with the weight of her ultimatum. She couldn't see his face, but she felt his gaze, a palpable force in the darkness. She was challenging him, the kingpin, the man who held her life in his hands, demanding accountability from a man who had always operated above the law. She expected fury, dismissal. Instead, a profound stillness settled over him. She heard his breath, slow and deliberate. Then his voice, low and resonant in the darkness, devoid of anger, tinged with something she couldn't quite decipher. "I understand, Fiona," he said, his words slow, measured, "and I accept." The simple declaration hung in the air, a defining choice. He had given his word. To her. For her. In that moment, in the absolute, suffocating darkness, Fiona knew her life had truly, irrevocably changed. She had stared into the abyss, and instead of crumbling, she had commanded it. Theodore's low, "I understand and I accept," hung in the suffocating darkness, a profound, almost unbelievable echo. Fiona's breath hitched. She had challenged him, the kingpin, demanded his surrender to a system he usually ignored, and he had agreed. A strange, almost dizzying wave of power and vulnerability washed over her. Then, with a sudden, jarring thunk, a single emergency light flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows across the cavernous warehouse. Its weak, yellow glow illuminated the scene like a macabre stage. David, pale and sweating, was scrambling from behind a stack of crates, his eyes wide with terror as he realized the full extent of his exposure. His two burly associates were already being cuffed by uniformed port security guards who had appeared, seemingly from the very fog outside. David saw Fiona, saw Theodore, and a guttural cry of rage and disbelief tore from him. "You!" he shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at her. "You betrayed me, Fiona. You always ruin everything." He lunged, a desperate, pathetic attempt to reach her, but Theodore stepped forward, a silent, unyielding wall. David collided with him, bouncing off his unmoving frame like a rag doll, before being quickly subdued by the guards. The wail of sirens, growing louder and closer, pierced the thick fog outside, a siren song of coming justice. Fiona watched David being dragged away, his face contorted in a mask of impotent fury. The man who had haunted her for years, who had bled her dry and tried to ruin another life, was finally being held accountable. A profound sense of release, mixed with a chilling sorrow for what he had become, settled over her. The ghost was finally gone. Authorities swarmed the warehouse, their flashlights cutting through the remaining gloom. Fiona's anonymous upload had worked. The Port Authority's internal security, now armed with the clean ledger, moved with swift, decisive action. Theodore's people, those not directly implicated by David's scheme, moved with quiet efficiency, cooperating with the official investigation. The fallout for Theodore was immediate. His operations were under intense scrutiny. Agents in sharp suits moved through the warehouse, questioning, documenting. Fiona knew the clean ledger she had uploaded would expose some of the grey areas of Theodore's empire, the edges where his logistics blurred into something less legitimate. But her meticulous work had also definitively isolated David's actions, proving his scheme was a parasitic growth, not an inherent part of Theodore's core business. It saved the legitimate heart of his vast enterprise, even as it forced a reckoning. Theodore stood quietly, observing the chaos, his face a stoic mask. An agent approached him, a terse exchange of words, a demand for cooperation. Theodore nodded, his gaze unwavering, acknowledging his position. He was facing the music, just as she had demanded. Fiona walked towards him, the heavy thrum of the sirens and the shouts of the officers feeling distant, unreal. He turned as she approached, his dark eyes meeting hers. She saw a flicker there, something she couldn't quite name, respect perhaps, or a grudging admiration. "You upheld your end," she said, her voice steady, despite the lingering tremor in her hands. "Now I expect you to uphold the rest." She wasn't just talking about David, she was talking about everything. Her choice, her final, unwavering stance, was clear. She wouldn't be a pawn in his world, not anymore. She had carved out her own terms, drawn her own lines in the sand. He looked at her, a long, assessing gaze that seemed to strip away all pretense, then a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "I will," he confirmed, his voice low, a promise forged in the crucible of chaos. It was a rare admission of moral authority from him, a silent bowing to her integrity. The core conflict, the dance between their two worlds, had reached its resolution. David was arrested, the fraudulent scheme dismantled, and Fiona had not only survived, but she had dictated the terms of her survival. A quiet understanding passed between them, a profound, unspoken acknowledgement of the deep, unconventional bond they had forged. It wasn't born of softness or romance, but of shared purpose, mutual respect for competence, and a terrifying, dangerous trust. She had found her agency, and he had found a conscience, however dark, in her unwavering moral compass. The battle was over, and they had both emerged, changed forever. 6 months later, Fiona Edwards finally felt the earth solid beneath her feet. The phantom ache of debt was gone, replaced by the quiet hum of financial security. David, a toxic memory, was serving time, his schemes unraveling completely under the relentless scrutiny of the port authorities and the mountain of evidence Fiona had compiled. He was a closed chapter, a distant nightmare she no longer woke up from in a cold sweat. Her office now was bathed in the soft glow of multiple monitors, not the oppressive silence of Theodore Griffin's tower. She was a lead coder at a thriving tech startup, her skills finally unleashed on projects that built rather than dismantled. The work was challenging, exhilarating, and entirely legitimate. She'd earned it, every bit of her success, forged in the crucible of Theodore's dangerous world. Her past, once a suffocating weight, was truly behind her. She had built herself a new horizon. Theodore's empire had weathered the storm. The clean ledger, Fiona's meticulous work, had allowed the authorities to isolate David's fraud, saving the legitimate core of Theodore's vast logistics network. There had been fines, public scrutiny, and a few uncomfortable headlines, but his operations had emerged surprisingly cleaner and stronger. He had upheld his end of their bargain, facing the consequences without retaliation or further shadow play. It was a testament to his strange code and to her unwavering demands. Their relationship, however, was still a delicate, evolving thing. They dated slowly, deliberately, with a quiet understanding that bordered on the absurdly professional. Fiona called them their HR-style boundaries, a running joke that underscored the unusual foundation of their connection. There were no grand declarations, no whirlwind romance, but a deep, unshakable respect and an unspoken intimacy forged in shared purpose and absolute trust. She met him for dinner once a week, usually at a discreet, upscale restaurant with impeccable service. Tonight, it was a quiet place overlooking the Embarcadero. The fog, a familiar presence, had lifted, revealing a sky dusted with stars. "The new container tracking system is almost fully integrated," Theodore said, his voice low as he cut into his steak. He still wore his expensive suits, still exuded that quiet, formidable power, but Fiona no longer felt dwarfed by it. She met his gaze, unafraid. "Good," she replied, stirring her wine. "That should flag any future discrepancies before they become systemic." He nodded. "Your initial algorithms were instructive. They formed the basis." She smiled. A genuine, easy smile that felt foreign and wonderful. "Glad to be of service, Mr. Griffin." He actually allowed a faint curve of his lips, a rare, almost imperceptible softening of his stern features. "Theodore? Fiona?" "Theodore?" she repeated, the name feeling less like a title, more like a quiet acknowledgement. "How are the port worker initiatives progressing?" His expression became thoughtful. "Better than expected. The vocational training program is seeing high enrollment, and the new benefits package for longshoremen is, well, it's proving effective." He didn't elaborate, didn't boast. He just stated facts. But Fiona knew. She knew the benefits package was Theodore's quiet way of making amends, of reinvesting in the people David had exploited. It was a subtle act of philanthropy, a quiet act of redemption, born from the chaos she had helped him navigate. Her influence. It was a powerful, humbling thought. She had demanded accountability, and he had given it in his own way. He wasn't a hero, not by any stretch, but he was a man capable of change, guided by a moral compass that, however dark its origins, now pointed in a better direction. Fiona felt the cool weight of her jade worrystone in her pocket. She didn't need to rub it anymore. The anxiety that had once defined her was gone, replaced by a quiet strength. She had found her voice, her power, and a strange, unconventional connection with a man who understood her in a way no one else ever had. Their romance was built on clear boundaries and honest respect, a testament to two scarred souls finding their own unique equilibrium in the heart of a city that never truly slept. She had carved out her own happy ending on her own terms. If you enjoyed the video, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel to keep up with our content.